In this video, we are going to be going over the ultimate guide to buying a high-rise in Las Vegas. My market is Las Vegas, but a lot of this information should transfer over to other markets as well. Now, the high-rise market is very distinct from the single-family market here in Las Vegas. So not a lot of people specialize in this. There's not that many sales compared to single-family homes because there's not a lot of vertical building in Las Vegas. So with that said, I'm going to share some of my tips, some of my knowledge, and hopefully you can find some valuable information in here. With that being said, this will be on the longer side of a video, so I will put timestamps below. So if you only want to know one certain thing, look down there for that timestamp and maybe jump ahead to that part. And lastly, as I said, there's going to be a lot of information in this video. So if you have a specific question that you couldn't find the answer to, or maybe you wanted some more detail on something in particular, I've got in the very first section of the description below, I've got a meeting link with me. We can do a Zoom like this. We can jump on a call. I can answer any of those questions you might have. So first, let's talk about how the market is in Las Vegas for high rises, what a condo is going to cost you, and maybe what the outlook is going forward. So over the last 12 months, our average price per square foot is about $500. There's many options that sell for over $1,000 a square foot, such as the Waldorf Astoria. There was a place in Turnberry Place that sold that way. Off the strip, you have one Queensridge. So there are a lot of options to go much more than the $1,000 a square foot. But as I said, for the last 12 months, around $500 a square foot is what we're looking at. And then also in terms of geographically, the places on the strip will have the most premium, especially near the city center, which is Waldorf, Veer Towers, stuff along those lines. And then as you go out, generally speaking, it gets a little bit cheaper, but we're gonna go all over a map that's going to show you all of these areas. So let's take a look at our first chart here. So this chart is going to show over the last 12 months what the sales activity has been in each price range in Las Vegas. So as you can see, the bulk of our sales happen in this $250,000 to $400,000 range. A lot of these properties are going to be Trump International, Veer Towers, it's going to be Signature MGM. A lot of those are really leading the way in terms of what's actually selling, and a lot of those towers have had just a lot of availability over the last 12 months. There's been also a huge uptick in people wanting to buy properties that they can do Airbnb in. A lot of those that I just mentioned, such as Trump International and MGM Signature, they're Airbnb eligible, so there's been a huge push towards that direction. And then the second category I wanted to talk about is our over $1 million range that you see here. So as you can see, it's a very active price range. You'll see properties in this region being Waldorf Astoria, one Queensridge Place off of the strip. You have places in Turnberry Place over here. Some of those, and maybe Park Towers is another one to mention, even though it doesn't have a lot of sales, but that's what's selling in the over $1 million range. And as you can see, it's quite active over the last 12 months. Here you have kind of the median sale price. So this would be places like Turnberry Towers, some of them in Turnberry Place. You'll have some in Veer Towers as well. Panorama, some of those are the ones that are trading in that $600,000 range. So now let's discuss where these towers are located, maybe where you might be looking if you were looking on or off the strip. So as you can see here on the computer, we're just gonna highlight a few things. So first off, this is Harry Reid International Airport, it used to be McCarran. And just off of that, you would have the strip over here. So a lot of these properties, we'll zoom in a little bit here and I'll give you a little bit more. So let me click off of that and that. So over here in City Center that we mentioned earlier, I'll get my little pointer out. So this would be City Center. In here, you would have the Waldorf Astoria, you would have Veer Towers, and just to the west of that, behind Aria, you would have Vidara, which is one of the properties that's eligible for short-term rentals as well. And then just west of that, a little bit more, you have Panorama Towers, you have the Martin. Both of those, well, all of those were supposed to be part of the same project. The Martin got sold off from Panorama Towers due to funding, I believe it was. So the Martin is its own thing. Panorama Towers, there's two towers over there. What's interesting about these, even though they're just slightly off of the strip, you actually have car services that are included in your HOA with all of these. So you have the opportunity to go, I think it's 5 miles, which as you can see, definitely covers within the airport distance. So you can get driven around a lot and not have to worry about taking Ubers, walking to the strip, stuff along those lines. So then the next area, while we're in this area that I want to mention, there's actually two I want to mention. So first, over here next to Palms Casino, you would have Palms Place, another Airbnb eligible high-rise, but it is, as you can see, just a little bit further off of the strip, maybe not as much walkability over there as you're, maybe a mile off the strip or so. And then if we go just east of this, let me clear this real quick and go back to my pointer. Okay, so if we came in just a little bit, you can see we have the MGM Grand here. I'll switch this to this view. So MGM Grand here, you can see it's kind of cross shape right there. And then over here you have MGM Signature. So these you might recognize as being the three towers that are all gold. They're right next to the Top Golf, which is this green area you can see right here. Also Airbnb eligible. These properties live a lot like hotel rooms. So, a lot of times in these Airbnb eligible places, you have to keep them exactly the same. So you can't have variances between your unit and maybe what somebody else would rent out. That's just due to you don't have your own listing for your exact unit. So then if we look here, what's interesting about MGM Signature here is you can go in a above ground air conditioned walkway that connects you to the MGM. So what that matters to you is this right here, the Tropicana, is what they're saying is going to be moving to be the Oakland A's stadium. So there could be a scenario in the very near future where you can actually just walk from Signature MGM and walk to the MGM, and then just right across the street you would be at the Oakland A's ballpark. So that would really do well if you were short-term renting that. A lot of places would probably rent out very well during those games depending on who's in town. One more I want to talk about while we're over here that I mentioned earlier is Park Towers. So let me just cheat a little bit and have it take us over there. So as you can see, not that far off of where we were. This is a very exclusive building, so it's about, I zoomed out. So it is, where was it? About right there. So this two towers are very exclusive. They live kind of like homes in the sky. They don't really feel as much like a condo. So these ones, more off the strip, you have a lot of opportunity to eat around here. There's steakhouses, there's fast food, there's stuff along those lines. There's like a FedEx over there. You can see there's a Target just around the corner. Down here is UNLV. And, with this property, it's, it's very high end. You get a lot of security there. I mean, when I drive up there to show a place, they're radioing me in before I even have my blinker on, it feels like. So that's a very desirable area. And some of these, you actually get a great view of the Sphere from over there. One just went under contract 2 weeks ago from the making of this video. Direct views of the Sphere. And it sold went under contract within 30 days, which is pretty fast for that building where not a lot of sales have happened. So now let's move a little bit further north. Let me get us a clean slate here, go back to my pointer. So next we're going to be looking for the Las Vegas Country Club. So as we go north a little bit, this is the Wynn Golf Club. This is the Las Vegas Country Club, and I always like to show this, so let me zoom in a little bit. There's actually a replica plane in the Las Vegas Country Club. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. So they did this because I think it was in the 80s, they were surveilling mob bosses here in the Las Vegas Country Club, the FBI was, and they actually had to land their plane in the golf club because they ran out of fuel from circling too much. So this is a replica of that. It's kind of just an interesting fact to know. So as we go back out, you have one option in here, which is Regency Towers. Those are kind of like the original towers of Las Vegas as far as high rises go. And then just off of there, you have a couple of options. So first, we want to talk about, let me close that. Turnberry Towers. So this is two towers. They offer north-south views a lot of times. You get, depending on where you're at, you get either views of the Las Vegas Country Club over this way from these towers, or you can get views kind of just of Turnberry Place, because Turnberry Place is about the same height, so you get a lot of obstructed views right here. And then this is supposed to be the all-net casino and resort. They've been missing deadlines to build, so as of this time, nothing's really been going on there. They're going through approval still, but that's what this will eventually be, is a sports-themed casino. And then the next one we're going to talk about is Turnberry Place. So 4 towers right here. Let me clean that up because it looks so ugly. So 4 towers right here, and with these, you can see the Sterling Club is in the middle. So that is a private club that you can join even if you're not a member of Turnberry Place. So these 4, what you've got to be careful of here is you see this large structure to the west of them. This is a large parking garage. I believe it's for the Fontainebleau right here. And what you've got to be careful of is if you're not high enough, you're going to get obstructed views and it's really going to hurt your resale value. So a lot of times you want to be a higher level here. This place has been very active as far as sales. It has the highest sale in the last 12 months, which was $8 million. So there's a lot of activity that goes on there, and it's worth mentioning that the monorail also runs along this way. You can see it through here. So a lot of people, when they move to these buildings, they like to utilize that monorail to get them around. And then while we're in this area, there's one more I want to mention off of Sahara here, and that would be Allure. Allure, it's just a normal condo, all residential over here. It has this boutique hotel next to it, which was a different hotel before, but it didn't do so well, so they had to rechange it. So the Allure right here, it has kind of like this dish on top is kind of the easy way to notice it. Right off of Sahara here, this is the large gift shop. So we're getting in the territory of North Strip a little bit, so that's an option to know. There's a few options over in downtown as well. You have Jewel, you have Newport Loft, so there's some options over there that are of interest. But the one I really want to get to is over to the west. So this is where we were, the whole strip over here. We're going all the way west to Summerlin, well, adjacent to Summerlin, I should say. So we are looking for, this is Queensridge here, we are looking for Queensridge Towers. So those are these 2 large towers here. So these ones also live very similar to park towers that we mentioned before. They live like homes in the sky. They have full kitchens. They have normal sized bedrooms. They're very well laid out. They're much more traditional. The HOAs are also rather high over here at about $3,000 or more per unit. And recently they had some assessments going on, but we're going to dive a little bit more into assessments a little bit later. So this is a good option over here. Puts you more in like the, suburban style of the town. You're not in the strip or anything like that. This was the golf course over here in Queensridge, which has since sold. They had to shut it down, and they're going to be building condos, townhomes, and I think assisted living over here. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. If you want more information on what's going on here specifically, drop me email below and I'll send you the most recent updates for that. And then right next to that, you have the Suncoast, which is a hotel and casino. We go there a lot for movie nights, actually, depending on the night. And then you have Tivoli Village, which is a smaller shopping center on this side of town. And then it's worth mentioning, you're only maybe 5-10 minutes away from downtown Summerlin over here, which is our main shopping hub over on this side of town. Before we had this in Summerlin, it was really, we had to go down to the strip to Fashion Show to get most of our shopping done. So this has been a huge plus. And we also have the Las Vegas ballpark over here, which is the current AAA team, which I believe they're saying is going to host the Oakland A's for a couple of seasons until the stadium gets built. So now the last thing we really want to talk about as we zoom back out here is the only project that is up and coming. So that would be all the way down here in McDonald Ranch. We are talking about the Four Seasons residences. So here in the Dragon Ridge Golf Club, they are building a Four Seasons residences. I'll put a picture here on the screen to show the renderings. They're currently doing pre-sales as of the time of this recording. I believe they start out at just over $3 million, go over well over $20 million. So this is really going to reshape the market in terms of what condos are selling for. I think it's going to elevate a lot of the other prices on the strip, like such as the Waldorf, because it's going to follow suit with this as being a cheaper alternative, but they're probably going to drag it up a little bit. So now that we've gone over the map and you have a better sense of where some of these towers are, and it's worth mentioning, I have a full video on this that kind of talks also about the price ranges of certain options as well. So I'll put a link above to that. But now that you have a sense of that, let's jump into some actual data. I think it's always important to know what's been going on in the market, what trends might be happening, and that could influence when and how you buy. So first, let's look at months of inventory. This is always a good barometer of if we're in a buyer's or a seller's market. Ignore this large, scary November line. The only reason that's so elevated right now is because it's only November 12th when I'm making this video, and it doesn't reflect the sales that will happen this month. So this number will go back down. It just looks scary because of when I pulled the data. And I should mention, I do market update videos at the beginning of every month reflecting the last month. So if you want the most current data, that's probably the best way to find it. So if you subscribe to here, you can look out for those videos, or you can go back and watch the other ones. So as you can see, really we're sitting mostly around, maybe if you average it around that 6-month mark, it really shows that we're in a balanced market. During these months, we were getting so many people inquiring. They were buying a lot of places at like MGM Signature, those Airbnb places. They were buying Veer Towers, and they were buying like Turnberry Towers. So during that time, there was just a huge amount of grab for those buildings. Like in MGM Signature, places were lasting for just a number of days. So really with this, what you're trying to get an understanding of is how many months would it take to absorb all of the current inventory. So I would say anything in that 4 to 7 month range is a balanced market. Anything above that, you're in a buyer's market. And then anything below that, kind of like we started to teeter on here, that's when you're in a seller's market where they can really elevate the prices. So this next chart we're going to take a look at is going to be the close price to list price ratio. What this is really showing is how much negotiability there is in the market at any given time. When it's a very seller's market, kind of like I guess it was in October, based on these stats, you get much closer to your original list price. So as you can see, maybe we're hovering around that 96.5% mark on average over these last 12 months. And this is lower than you would see in the single family housing market. I say the single family housing market sits closer to 98, 97, 99% depending on the market. So this will really just show you if it's a seller's market, this number is going to be higher. If it's a buyer's market, you have more negotiability. I think a lot of this right here is being influenced by interest rates. So probably as we see spikes, that's probably when the numbers change a little bit. The next one we're going to look at is just days on market on average over the last 12 months. So what this is really showing you is how long it takes you to sell a property in this particular time frame. And what we're really looking at here is much more than you see in the single family housing market. I think right now in the single family housing market, we're sitting somewhere around 30 days, which is not so far off of this. This is probably around 50 for this month so far. But really, this is much more elevated. So what this is going to tell you when you look at trends over time is if you see a particular property you like and you've been watching it for a while, maybe you know that when it's getting up on 45 days or so, it could begin to get offers that might cause it to sell. If you see a property that you like and maybe it's crossed over this 60-day mark, maybe you know it's a little bit higher price than it should be, and maybe they should be willing to take a lower offer. So those are kind of the stats you need to know. We follow this every month, and we're also very active in the market. So really being active in the market is probably more important than following the last month's stats, because it takes 30 to 60 days for a place to close. So you're getting old data by the time it's released. So now that we know some of the stats, we know where the towers are located, and we've gone over just a little bit of the general market, let's talk about the actual process of buying one of these high rises and the risks and obstacles that come along with those. As I said, not many people specialize in this market, so it's important to know the obstacles that you might face going forward. And the first one to talk about is financing. So not all of these towers can you just get traditional financing. You can't just walk into your Chase Bank or US Bank, Wells Fargo, and get a normal loan. And that's due to a multitude of reasons. One could be that it's a condo hotel, such as the Waldorf Astoria, maybe Vdara. And the problem with those is that you're sharing amenities with the hotel guests. So these are non-warrantable, is what they call them, as far as loans. So a lot of times these loans have to go through a mortgage broker, and then that mortgage broker has an individual investor or a group of investors that then purchase those loans. So that's why it's important to connect with a professional that knows these kind of things, because if you go and get pre-approved at your normal bank, it might not matter because that bank might not be able to close that loan. And then on the flip side, there's another issue that you need to be aware of, and that would be construction defect litigation. There's several towers that currently have this going on. Veer Towers is currently one of them as of the making of this video. I believe that one is due to dust intrusion from the pool being resurfaced that's on the top of the tower. That's going on there. Over in panorama towers, you have leaky windows, I want to say it is, where the windows are not sealing properly and it's allowing water to leak in, and people are claiming it's destroying their flooring. So what that matters to you is when this construction defect litigation is going on, even if you think it's not a big deal, if it doesn't matter, because none of this is like the towers falling down, but what it means is that a bank will not lend on it. It's way too risky. So we work with specific lenders that are aware of these issues. They have investors that are aware of these issues, and they close deals in there specifically. So it's a pretty tight-knit network of people that can actually close these. And it's the same thing when it goes for places that allow for short-term rental. You have to work with a lender that understands this, because when they're going to do these appraisals, these comps, they can use the short-term rental data to get that condo approved, as opposed to looking only at long-term rental data or at comps. So as I said, you've really got to be connected with the right agent that knows the right lenders that can get these deals done. There are some other towers, such as like Turnberry Towers, Turnberry Place, that you can do more traditional financing, but it's really on a case-by-case basis, and all it takes is one person to cause litigation, and then it's going to change the landscape anyways. So inherently with that, with some of these towers, you're going to need a little bit more money down, depending on what the current status is of it. So, because there's even some towers that have like, they're delinquent in their HOA dues, and like MGM Signature is a good example, where it's like a $15 HOA, but somehow they're delinquent in it, so it makes it hard to finance. There's just a lot of nuance in there. So connect with a professional, somebody like me or somebody who does a lot in the high-rise market. They'll be able to advise you correctly. And this is probably applicable to other areas, not just Las Vegas. So as we talked about before, one of the obstacles you have to overcome is also one of the benefits. Airbnb is, I mean, it's very hard to get a single family housing to actually allow Airbnb in Las Vegas. You have to have like a certain barrier around another Airbnb property. It cannot go against your HOAs, such as like in Summerlin, you can't have an Airbnb in any way, shape, or form. So what you need to know when it comes to these rental restrictions is, if you wanted to be Airbnb eligible, there's only a few towers that actually allow you to do that. Some of those would be MGM Signature, Vdara, it would be Trump International, Palms Place are some of the most popular. There's other opportunities as well, but sometimes those don't come on the market as often because there's sometimes limited availability, such as Vdara. There was only 150 that were ever sold privately to other people. Same can be said of like the Cosmopolitan, and not many of those were ever sold privately as well. And most of the other towers are really going to be a 6-month or maybe a 12-month minimum rental cycle. So as people are buying a lot of these properties for second homes, you need to know what your availability is to actually be able to rent this place out. Park Towers, for example, 1-year minimum rental cycle. They just don't want a lot of turnover. And Veer Towers, 6-month. Waldorf Astoria, 6-month. Waldorf is an interesting one because it's a condo hotel, but you're not eligible to do the short-term rental like the hotel portion is. But you also get your own separate entrance at Waldorf Astoria compared to going in the main lobby that the hotel guests go through. And then if you're somebody who's trying to take a risk and wants to maybe do this anyways, it's worth noting that a lot of these towers, if not all, are going to want a copy of this lease when you move somebody else in. So to get around these is going to be very tough. I would never advise that because you're breaking your HOA rules. So you are going to have to probably provide them a copy of your lease when somebody else is going to get access to that unit over the long term. So next, let's talk a little bit about what fees are involved and maybe what you're responsible to pay for in some of these high rises. A lot of people like a place that's just turnkey, that they can just leave when they're out of town. So that inherently brings more costs involved. A lot of times you're going to have your HOA cover stuff like your trash, your water, maybe your cable, and then you're usually responsible for your own on the electricity. So like the water, for example, because most of these places have pools, it's just metered throughout the whole building. It's then divided by the number of units / square footage, and that's how they come to that number. So a lot of that data is hard to find on your own when you're on these public-facing portals like Zillow, Realtor.com. So it's good to reach out to somebody who knows these towers. We should be able to, as realtors, give you that information fairly quickly. And with these HOA fees, what you should also understand is the more you pay in these HOA fees, typically the more desirable that building is because it's going to have better amenities. You're going to have the 24-hour concierge. You're going to have the security where it's going to be key fobs, or something like the panorama where it's biometric finger scans. So depending on your level of services in that building, your HOA is going to be higher. So that's something you need to take into account. and you need to understand how much you're really going to use those amenities and how much maybe you're just paying for the ability to. If you're really finding this information valuable, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. It gets me to a lot more people so I can help more people, because there's a lot of misrepresentation in this market. So I've really put it on myself to try to get more involved in this high-rise market, just so that people can get proper representation and not risk their deposits or anything along those lines by not knowing what's going on. So now, as we're moving along in the process here of how to buy these condos and what you should be looking for, let's next talk about what you should be looking for as far as for yourself and for resaleability. And the first one I would say is the wow factor. You should really be looking for a place in Las Vegas that has views if possible. That would be the number one thing I get people asking about, is they want unobstructed views, specifically strip views if possible. So if you have the ability to finance something along those lines, that's what you should be leaning for. I would say, in my experience, views is more important than amenities. Typically though, those two go together, because a lot of the towers that have unobstructed views also have great amenities within them. But views is probably the number one thing you should be looking for. And by buying something that has unobstructed views of the strip or something along those lines, you're really setting yourself up to be desirable in any market. If the market comes down a little, you still have a great unit that might fetch a little bit of a premium. And same thing if it goes up, yours is going to appreciate more than other units. A good example of this is actually in the Waldorf Astoria. You have two similar sized models that are nearly identical, but they're on the opposite end of the same tower. One is the 03, one is the 06 model. And the 03 model faces south. It has views of like New York, New York. It has views of the Raiders Stadium, depending on how high up you are. And then the 06 model is facing north. The north strip views are just much more glamorous compared to the south facing views. And there's a huge premium between the two. So little things like that is what you need to know going into it, because you might see that both of these are about 1,600 square feet. But one's going to be worth maybe $500,000 more just because of that view, and it's always going to be more desirable because of that. So now that we've talked about when you're looking and you want to determine your wow factor and your desirability going forward, it's also time to talk about the amenities of that building. So it's a double-sided thing here, because one, especially for resale, you're going to want to have great amenities to be able to offer for the next person. But at the same time, you need to understand yourself how much you're going to be using those amenities, and is it worth the premium? Because you're probably going to be spending, 95% of your time just in your unit. You're not going to be probably going to the spa or to the pool every single day. What I would say might be more important for an individual use case might be what's close by. It might be the walkability. If you can live in the Waldorf Astoria, walk straight out of your condo and be right on the strip and maybe a very desirable part, you can walk right to Crystal Shops and have dinner there at Mastro's. That might be more important to you than being a little bit off of that area and saving a little bit on the amenities. So you really need to know for yourself what's going to be desirable and what you're going to use the most. So depending on your situation, you might want to buy a slightly smaller unit in a tower that has more amenities, depending on how much you're going to be using it, and looking at the data to show what days on market looks like for that particular tower. So those are some of the things we go into when we do these buyer consults with people, is we need to understand what you're going to be using the place for. If you're only a part-time resident, maybe that doesn't matter as much to you. So depending on your situation, you may very well want a smaller unit in a more desirable building that has more amenities or maybe has better walkability, just for what you're going to be using it for. If you're only a part-time resident, maybe you don't need Zumba classes every day. Maybe you don't need a tennis court that you're paying to maintain all year round. Stuff along those lines. But really, you should be looking for, at a minimum, a tower that has a pool, a gym, and probably a business center. I mean, you can have places at these towers that have libraries, they can have theaters, they can have a lot more than what we're talking about, but I think you need those as a bare minimum. So we're only partway through this video, but I'm going to harp on it again. So please work with an expert that knows these buildings, and please ask them their actual experience selling in these buildings. There's just so much nuance going on here. We're going to talk in a minute about going into the offer process, and you really don't want to risk your deposit by working with somebody who doesn't understand these buildings. Even if you have a family friend that is a realtor here, maybe consider having them partner with somebody who knows the buildings and splitting that commission with them. It's more important that you're taken care of than it is maybe you make one of your family members or a friend mad. I know on my end, I've seen it time and time again that an agent who maybe only does single family housing in a different part of town, they come in there, they put somebody under contract on a unit that I've been watching for 6 months. I'm like, how'd they come up with this price? But then somebody else who's never worked in that market brings a buyer to that. So little things like that are what you need to know. I mean, as a listing agent, when you're listing one of these high rises and an agent calls you and they don't know the basics of a building and they don't know, like, where do I park? What are the amenities? It gives you not the best foot forward going from the very beginning, because we know that this agent doesn't know a lot about these buildings. So now that we've got you working with an expert, now that you have your proper pre-approval, or maybe you have your proof of funds if you're paying cash, let's talk about viewing these properties. So especially in the high-rise market, you're going to need this proof of funds or this pre-approval before even getting in the door. They're just such exclusive properties that they're not going to let just anybody come in off the street. I've had so many inquiries of people that are just visiting for the weekend and they want to come up to the Waldorf and see a $3 million place, but they don't have any money to show. So you're really going to need that set up first, and then you can start viewing properties. So in my experience, I've seen a lot of buyers, they can tell if they like a tower or a particular unit right off the bat. It's just a gut feeling for them. So it's really about making sure that when you walk into this building, it feels like a place you could actually spend a lot of time in. And if I have to heavily sell you on the benefits of a particular building, it might not be the best for you. I mean, I'm not going around to these condos and I'm not, brushing the granite and opening the cabinets and talking about what they're made of, because a lot of these are, 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. We're not all going to be standing in the kitchen at the same time. So you really need to get a feel for it yourself. And this is where you really start to determine what's important to you. Is a higher floor maybe more important to you to have the more unobstructed views? Or do you maybe actually like to be a little bit lower in the building so that when you're sitting in a chair, it looks like you're surrounded by the buildings? That's a little tip that a lot of people don't realize, is you can be on the 32nd floor of a building and you're going to have to get onto your balcony to get any views worthwhile. Whereas maybe if you're on like the 8th or 10th floor, you're going to be sitting amongst the buildings. So it really matters what you're interested in, because if you're wanting the best views, it's going to be from your balcony on the higher floor. But if you want to feel like you're always having views, maybe you actually want to be a little bit lower. So as you've gotten a feel for these buildings and as you've started looking at some of these particular units, after you found the one, let's talk about the actual offer process. So the first thing you need to know is you need to have your earnest money ready when you make the offer. It has to be wired within 1 to 3 business days, depending on how we write the contract. You can't be waiting to liquidate your mutual funds. You can't be waiting to liquidate something in the stock market. When you make that offer, you have to be ready to wire those funds, likely the next day. And since you're pre-approved, or maybe if you're cash, you have your proof of funds ready, you should have your down payment ready at this point too. A lot of these towers that have the condo hotels or the construction litigation, you're gonna have to be putting 20% down most likely. You're gonna talk to your lender more about this, but that's what you should be prepared. So the 20% and your earnest money is within that 20% as well. And it's worth noting that over the last 12 months and just historically, more than half of our deals on the high-rise market happen in cash. So that's why you've got to work with these lenders that know what's going on, because when these deals happen that are by financing, it usually comes from just a handful of lenders that understand the market. Let's talk about putting together the actual offer now. Opposed to the single-family housing market, where we don't really use price per square foot that often, you do use it a lot in these towers, especially when you can find comps in the same tower. But there is some nuance to it. It's like we mentioned earlier, you may have 2 units that look exactly the same as far as square footage, but one may have a far superior view that faces a strip, the other one doesn't as much. So you really need to have a grasp on the whole entire market to determine what actually your price should be. So using that price per square foot and model matches, you probably determined your offer price. You've looked at days on market to understand where it's probably at in the cycle, and you're looking at months of inventory to understand where if it's a buyer's or a seller's market. So then we need to talk about time frame. So it's likely going to take you anywhere from 21 to 45, maybe 60 days to close on a particular unit. And what really comes into play there, if you're cash, the 21 days is so that you have enough time to get the HOA documents, because you need to get those before you're eligible to close the property, because part of title's job is to make sure that you're getting a fully usable title that doesn't have any encumbrances on it. I just sold a place earlier this year that they were behind 4 months on HOA. We had to make sure that was brought up current before we could transfer it to the new owner. And then on the other end, up to the 45 to 60 days, that's really going to be more if you're into the financing portion of it. So if you're going to be financing it, we have to have time for them to do all of their underwriting. We have to have time for the appraisal to be done. So you really need just a little bit more time, and you can close earlier in this because it's always, if you put 45 days, you pick a date and you say on or before. So if everything gets done beforehand, you can really close before, but you want that extra time so that your deposit is safe. And then in this offer, you should address certain stipulations you may have. Do you want it to be delivered without any tenant in there if there's currently a tenant? Do you want to have an appraisal done on this property? What do you want to do as far as inspections? Because a lot of times these places are so small, there's not a lot you can really inspect, but maybe for yourself you still want to, because generally speaking in a high-rise, everything within the walls is the responsibility of the owner. But everything outside of the walls, such as a lot of the plumbing, the air conditioning, that might be responsible for the building. So it's up to you if that's actually worthwhile. Inspection's probably going to cost you anywhere from $300 to $600. So it's really up to you if you want to do that, to really check out the appliances is what it would be. So to get all of this stuff done, we typically recommend a 10-day due diligence. During this time, you can cancel for anything that you would like to, and you can get your deposit back. So we typically recommend a 10-day. You can go a little bit longer if you need to. So those HOA documents are required in every deal. And what you really need to see in these is you need to see what the HOA dues are, what restrictions there might be on the property. You probably need to know, which you should already know at this point, what the pet restrictions are for the building. Some of them require you to use a service elevator if you're going to bring your dog in the elevator. Some of them require you to carry them if they're smaller, depending on the building. And then you just need to generally know, are there any special assessments coming up? What are the reserves looking like for the building? What upcoming maintenance will there be? Will it affect your HOA dues? These are all things you need to look at within this HOA packet, which are pretty extensive. If you can't figure it out yourself, we can't really advise you on it because it's a legal matter. So we have you get an actual real estate attorney to review any particular questions you might have of your usability. But most of it you should be able to understand yourself. And with this HOA packet, so once you receive it, you have 5 days to review it. That's why we give that 21-day time frame. You can choose to waive this earlier if you've already reviewed it and you're okay with everything, or maybe if you already own a unit in the building and you're okay with everything beforehand. It isn't mandatory, but you do get 5 days to review this, and this is another opportunity where if something went wrong, you could cancel the deal. So now that we've had your offer accepted, you've gone through your due diligence, and maybe you've gotten your inspection or maybe your appraisal, it's really time to talk about the actual closing process. So on the week of closing, we always recommend having a closing date of maybe a Wednesday or a Thursday. And the reason for this being, a lot of people choose a Friday to close, but then one hiccup happens, we can't close on that day, and you have to wait until Monday or maybe Tuesday to actually get that property. So really we recommend closing on a Wednesday or a Thursday if possible. It's just a much easier experience. So on the week of the closing, you want all of your funds ready to be wired. You want to wire these beforehand because it's going into escrow. They're going to hold it for you, but you want them to be available right then and there. And then you also want to be ready to sign your paperwork. You're likely going to have to sign this in person. If you're an out-of-state buyer, we can actually have a mobile notary come to you. They will have you sign a couple of days early. They will overnight the package back to title, and they will get that before closing with your wet signature on it. And also don't forget to set up your utilities during this time. You want to make sure that if you're responsible for paying electricity or something along those lines, that you're not going to be moving into a place that has no power. So you want to make sure that all of these are set up beforehand. And also before this step, we would have already talked about this, you and I, but we want to also make sure you have a moving company that is eligible to work in that building. A lot of times you have to carry a lot more liability to be able to do work in these buildings. So you need to work with a moving company that has that amount of liability. We can usually get that information for you. And then on the morning of the actual closing, everything will be reviewed. It will be sent to the lender if that's applicable, and they will finish the underwriting process and approve of everything. Hopefully their wire would already be sent in if you were financing it. And then at that point, title and escrow review everything and they release it to record. In this current age, we send it digitally to the county to actually get recorded. It used to be they would have to actually courier that down to get somebody to do it for you, but it's much quicker these days. It used to take 4 to 5 hours to record. Now it can happen in 1 to 2, depending on the time it's actually released. So typically it should record the same day. And then once it's recorded at the county level, we get a copy of that deed. We send it to the HOA so they can make sure to transfer the ownership on their end to you. But really, most of the time, this can be done just by sending an email to them. They're well aware that the property has been listed for sale. They understand that the transaction's happening. So if the owner or the listing agent emails the HOA and tells them, hey, this property is now sold, give the keys and the access to this other person, they'll likely just take care of that for you. But sometimes I've had to personally run physical copies of deeds to HOAs to make sure to get clients in before like a weekend starts or something along that line. So hopefully you found this information valuable. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. I covered a lot of details. So if you have any questions, utilize that meeting link below. If not, subscribe to the channel. We do market updates. We provide a lot of information like this. So hopefully we can see you on the next one. Thank you.